Good afternoon, everyone, as we gather on this Friday and this second week of the Easter season. Our daily gospel reading begins with John chapter 6 today. And all of next week, we'll hear from John chapter 6, known as the Bread of Life Discourse. And as I was praying with that today, it reminds me how sad it is this weekend and next weekend that we will not be able to gather and celebrate First Holy Communion Masses with our second graders. And really, again, one of the great gifts of being a priest is to celebrate these First Holy Communion Masses, the young people coming to the table of the Lord for the first time to share in the real presence of Jesus' very life, his body and blood in the Eucharist. But we will be doing it one day, and we'll gather with them, and it'll be a day of great joy. But as a reminder that, again, I cannot gather for public masses right now because of the COVID-19 virus, and you're missing out on the body and blood of Christ. But we can use this time and this gospel reading from John chapter 6 beginning today throughout next week. Just read over John chapter 6, pray with it, to deepen your love of the Eucharist, deepen your love and your belief in Jesus' real presence in the body and blood of Christ. And so let me read the reading today and our reflection to help us to enter it today and go into next week as we continue to be hearing and nourished by Jesus, the bread of life. And so it's John chapter 6, verse 1 and 15. Jesus went across the Sea of Galilee. A large crowd followed him because they saw the signs he was performing on the sick. Jesus went up the mountain, and as he sat down with his disciples, the Jewish feast of Passover was near. When Jesus raised his eyes and saw that a large crowd was coming to him, he said to Philip, "Where can we buy enough food for them to eat?" He said this to test him, because he knew himself knew that what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 200 days' wages worth of food would not be enough for each of them to have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, the brother of Simon Peter, said to him, "There's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what good are these for so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people recline." Now there was a great deal of grass in that place. So the men reclined, about 5,000 in number. Then Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed them to those who were reclining, and also as much of the fish as they wanted. When they had had their fill, he said to his disciples, "Gather the fragments left over, so that nothing will be wasted." So they collected them, and filled 12 wicker baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves that had been more than they could eat. When the people saw the sign he had done, they said, "This is truly the prophet, the one who is coming into the world." Since Jesus knew they were going to come and carry him off to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain alone. The gospel of the Lord. Loving, gracious God, as we gather today, we give you praise and thanks for the gift of the Eucharist, that your Son Jesus offers his very life to us in the body and blood. Nourish and strengthen us in the ways of faith so that we can truly deepen our love of the Eucharist. And when we can gather again, we can do so with greater faith, greater joy, greater love of the Eucharist. Gracious, loving God, bless us today. Nourish us today with your everlasting love and help us to be your bread, your life to the world. God's blessings.